"Get off the horse, hands on the hood of my car, now!" The deputy's voice was like gravel, filled with a threat that had nothing to do with the law. But he was about to learn that the woman he was threatening was the law. The sun was hot on the plains of Wyoming. Deputy Miller, a man whose uniform was stretched tight over his gut, had pulled over a horse. Not a car, a horse, on a quiet dirt road miles from anywhere. The rider, a black woman named Imani, sat tall in her saddle, her expression unreadable. Her horse, a powerful buckskin named Atlas, shifted nervously. Imani calmed him with a gentle hand on his neck. "Deputy," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I haven't broken any laws. My ranch is just over that hill. This is my property line." Miller spat on the ground, a gesture of pure contempt. "I don't care whose land it is. I'm the law here, and I saw you riding recklessly. Now get off the horse before I pull you off. The year is 2024. This wasn't about public safety. It was a raw, ugly abuse of power." Imani was everything Miller resented. Confident, capable, and unimpressed by his badge, he thought he had found an easy target to intimidate. He was wrong. What Imani did next would end his career. If you believe no one is above the law, smash that like button and subscribe, because this is a story of justice you won't want to miss. Comment below with the city you're from and the word THAR, badge of honor. Imani didn't move. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Pull me off my horse, and it will be the last thing you do in that uniform." The threat was clear. Miller saw it as a challenge from a powerless civilian. He was weaving a narrative in his head, a story of a combative suspect resisting arrest that he could put in his report. He was sure he held all the cards. But what happens when you try to bully someone who holds a hand you can't even imagine? The dusty road became a silent battleground. The only sounds were the buzzing of cicadas and the creak of Imani's leather saddle. Miller was a man used to being feared. He'd worked in this county for 15 years, building a reputation for being a hardliner, especially with anyone who didn't look like him. His authority was his identity, and he saw Imani's calm defiance as a personal attack. "That's a threat against a peace officer," Miller said, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his pistol. "That adds another charge to your list." "What list is that?" Imani asked, her voice dangerously soft. "The one you're inventing in your head?" An old pickup truck rattled down the road, slowing as it approached. The driver was a weathered old rancher named Hank, who had worked for Imani's family for 30 years. He stopped a short distance away, his face a mask of concern. He knew Miller's reputation. Hank's presence changed the dynamic. There was a witness. Miller's face flushed with anger. He felt his power being challenged, his public authority questioned. He needed to reassert control, and fast. The rancher was a secondary problem. The woman on the horse was the primary one. His motivation was no longer just prejudice. It was desperation. He couldn't afford to look weak in front of a local. "You're obstructing justice," he snarled at Imani, ignoring Hank completely. "And this horse," he said, stepping toward Atlas and reaching for his reins, "is going to be impounded as evidence." This was a calculated move. He knew that for a rancher, a horse was more than property. It was a partner. He wanted to provoke her, to force a reaction that he could legally call assault. It was a classic bully tactic, designed to create a crime where none existed. He was so focused on his own petty game that he failed to see the steel in Imani's eyes. He failed to understand that she wasn't just a cowgirl. The moment Miller's hand touched Atlas's reins, the horse shied violently. Imani's control was absolute. She settled him instantly with a word, but the line had been crossed. This was no longer about intimidation. It was a direct threat to her partner. The conflict had reached its peak. Any other person might have panicked, yelled, or fought back. Exactly what Miller wanted. But Imani's reaction was the last thing he expected. It was silence. She swung her leg over the saddle and dismounted, landing softly on the dusty ground. She stood eye to eye with him. She was taller than he expected, her presence more formidable without the horse. "Step away from my horse, deputy," she said, her voice low and commanding. Miller laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Or what? You gonna cry to your daddy? I am the law." He puffed out his chest. "And you are under arrest." This was his final move. He had his charge: resisting arrest, threatening an officer. He had a witness he could intimidate later. He reached for his handcuffs, the metal clicking in the quiet air. He was about to put his hands on her. This was the point of no return, the point where all pretense of lawfulness was gone. He was a man with a badge, a gun, and a grudge, about to assault a citizen on her own land. Imani watched his hand go for the cuffs. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't back away. Instead, she reached inside her denim jacket. Miller tensed. "Don't even think about it," he hissed, his own hand dropping to his sidearm. "I'm not," Imani said calmly. "But you should." Her hand emerged from her jacket. It wasn't holding a weapon. It was holding a small leather wallet. She flipped it open. The sun glinted off a polished, seven-pointed star. It was a badge. Not a county sheriff's badge, but a gold-plated state investigator's badge. Miller froze. His brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The cowgirl he was about to arrest was holding a badge that held more authority than his own. The power dynamic of the entire encounter didn't just shift. It shattered. The silence on that road was deafening. Miller stared at the badge, then at Imani's face, then back at the badge. It was real. The official seal of the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation was unmistakable. His mind was a frantic mess of confusion and dawning, sickening horror. "What? What is this?" he stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "It's my identification," Imani said, her voice as cold and hard as the badge she held. "Investigator Imani Williams. And you, deputy, are in a whole world of trouble." She snapped the wallet shut and put it away. The immediate consequence of her reveal was Miller's complete psychological collapse. His bluster, his aggression, his entire persona evaporated, replaced by the pale, sweaty fear of a man who knows he has just made a career-ending mistake. Hank, the old rancher, watched from his truck, his jaw hanging open. He'd seen Miller bully people for years. He had never seen him look so small. Miller's mind raced, trying to formulate a lie, a way out. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice now a desperate whine. "I was just conducting a routine stop." "There was nothing routine about it," Imani said, her eyes boring into him. "You didn't state a reason for the stop. You didn't identify yourself properly. You threatened me and you threatened my animal. And luckily for me," she said, nodding toward Hank, "we have a witness." Miller's face went from pale to ghostly white. He had been so focused on his own power trip that he hadn't considered the consequences. He had operated on the assumption that his word would always be taken over hers. That assumption was now gone. He had tried to weave a web of lies, but he was the one who was now caught in it. He had threatened a state investigator, and he had done it in front of a witness. This was the turning point. The moment the hunter became the hunted. Imani took a step toward him, and he flinched. "Let me be very clear about what happens next, Deputy Miller," she said, adopting the official dispassionate tone of an investigator. "First, you will return to your vehicle. You will use your radio to request the immediate presence of your commanding officer. You will inform him that you have been engaged by a state-level officer in the course of her duties." Every word was a hammer blow to Miller's crumbling authority. He was no longer giving orders. He was taking them. My sergeant," he stammered, as if the thought of involving his superior was terrifying. "The sheriff himself, if he's available," Imani corrected. "Second, you will not speak to the witness," she said, gesturing to Hank. "You will not approach him. You will not attempt to intimidate him. He is now a material witness in a state investigation. Am I making myself clear?" Miller could only nod, his mouth dry. He looked like a child who had been caught setting a fire. This was a complete reversal of roles. He had demanded she get off her horse. Now she was ordering him back to his car. He had threatened her with arrest. Now she was threatening him with a formal investigation that could lead to prison time. Her calm, procedural takedown was far more devastating than any shouting match could have been. Her father, a legendary lawman himself, had taught her this lesson long ago. The badge isn't power, honey. It's a responsibility. The moment you use it for power, you've already lost it. But when someone else abuses theirs, you use your responsibility to remind them what the law actually is. She was living that lesson now. The turning point wasn't just about revealing her identity. It was about her claiming her authority and using it not for revenge, but for justice. She walked over to Atlas, stroking his neck to calm him, her movements slow and deliberate. She was in complete control. Miller, defeated and humiliated, stumbled back to his patrol car, his hand shaking as he reached for the radio. The consequences of Miller's actions were unfolding in real time. His call over the radio was a masterpiece of panicked, choked speech. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3B. I need Sergeant Reynolds at my location." Affirmative. I've made contact with a state official." The dispatcher's confused voice crackled back, asking for clarification he couldn't give. The facade was crumbling. Imani walked over to Hank's truck. The old rancher looked at her with a new kind of respect. "Imani, I had no idea." "It's not something I advertise, Hank," she said with a small smile. "Thank you for stopping. You have no idea how important it was." "That snake," Hank growled, nodding toward Miller's car. "He's had this coming for a long time. Anything you need, I'll tell him. I'll tell him everything I saw." "I know you will," she said. The dynamic had been permanently altered. Miller was isolated in his car, stewing in the consequences of his actions. Imani was on the outside, calmly gathering her witness statement, building her case. She wasn't gloating. She was working. This was her job. The initial shock had given way to a cold, professional focus. She was no longer a victim of harassment. She was an officer conducting an investigation into a corrupt cop. Her personal feelings were secondary to the procedure she now had to follow. This was the growth, the transformation. The cowgirl had been forced to become the investigator. 20 minutes later, 2 more patrol cars sped down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust. Sergeant Reynolds, a heavy-set man with a tired face, got out of the first car, followed by the county sheriff himself, a man named Davies. Sheriff Davies was a politician. He saw the scene, one of his deputies looking terrified. A state investigator's car, which Imani had called for, parked behind him, and Hank, a well-known local, and he instantly knew this was a nightmare. "Investigator Williams?" Davies asked, approaching Imani with a hand outstretched. "I'm Sheriff Davies. I came as soon as I heard. What seems to be the problem here?" Before Imani could speak, Miller scrambled out of his car. "Sheriff, thank God. This woman, she refused to cooperate. She threatened me." "Deputy, shut your mouth," Davies snapped without even looking at him. His focus was entirely on Imani. This was the moment of truth. Imani had evolved from a defensive position to one of absolute command. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had the facts, she had the law, and she had the authority. "Sheriff," Imani began, her voice calm and even. "At approximately 2:15 p.m., your deputy, Officer Miller, conducted an illegal stop without probable cause. He failed to identify a reason for the stop, engaged in verbal harassment, and attempted to illegally seize my private property. When I questioned his authority, he threatened me with a false arrest. He did all of this," she added, looking Miller dead in the eye, while his body camera was mysteriously turned off. She let that last part hang in the air. It was a detail she had noticed during the confrontation, a fatal error on Miller's part. "Luckily," she continued, "Mr. Hank here was a witness to the entire event, and as it happens, my own audio recorder was running the whole time." She held up a small digital recorder, the final nail in Miller's coffin. He had tried to create a situation with no evidence. She had just produced it all. The air crackled with tension. Sheriff Davies looked from the recorder in Imani's hand to the ashen face of his deputy. The preparation for the climax was complete. All the pieces were on the board. "Miller," the sheriff said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is what she's saying true? Is your body cam off?" Miller couldn't form a coherent sentence. He just stammered. It must have malfunctioned, sir. The heat, Imani repeated, her voice dripping with irony. "Or the fact that you have 17 citizen complaints filed against you for harassment in the last 2 years. All of them dismissed for lack of evidence." Sheriff Davies's head snapped toward Imani. This was the bombshell, the Rivera Volta. She wasn't just a random investigator who happened to get harassed. "You've been investigating my department?" he asked, a new kind of fear in his eyes. "My office has," Imani clarified. "We've had reports of deputies in this county shaking down migrant workers and engaging in biased policing." Miller's name kept coming up. "I was out here on my family's ranch on my own time, but you could say my investigation started the moment your deputy decided to make me his next victim. The secondary plot, the reason for her being there, slammed into the main conflict. It was no longer about a single incident on a dirt road. It was about a pattern of corruption that she now had a first-hand, perfectly documented account of." The sheriff understood. This wasn't just about firing a bad cop. This was about saving his entire department from a state-level takeover. He had to act, and he had to act decisively. The focus shifted entirely from Imani's actions to Miller's. "Sergeant," Davies ordered Reynolds, "escort Deputy Miller back to the station. Secure his weapon and his badge. He is on administrative leave, effective immediately. I want a full audit of his last 50 traffic stops on my desk by morning." Miller looked completely broken. As Reynolds led him away, he looked back at Imani. His eyes filled not with anger, but with the pathetic disbelief of a man who had been so thoroughly and completely outplayed. Part 9. Approximately 800 words. The climax was not a shout, but a quiet, professional dismantling. With Miller gone, Sheriff Davies turned back to Imani, his posture entirely different. He was no longer a superior. He was a colleague in damage control mode. "Investigator," he said, his voice laced with forced sincerity. "I am appalled. This is not what my department stands for. You have my full cooperation." Imani's expression remained unyielding. Her transformation was visible in her posture, her tone, her unblinking gaze. This wasn't a victory to be celebrated. It was a job to be finished. "Your cooperation will be essential, Sheriff," she said, "because this incident report is going straight to the Attorney General's office. The one I was going to meet with next week, it just got moved up to tomorrow morning." This was the final, crushing blow. She wasn't just reporting it up her own chain of command. She was taking it to the top. The plausibility of this reviravolta was perfect. A state investigator would have these connections. It challenged every expectation Miller and the sheriff had about her. "I'll need your official statement, Sheriff, and a copy of your department's policy on body camera usage and de-escalation training. I'll also be taking a statement from Mr. Hank, and I'll be logging my audio recorder and his testimony into evidence." She was running the show. She gave orders to the sergeant, requested files from the sheriff, and secured her witness. Each action was a precise, calculated step in building an ironclad case. The protagonist's transformation was complete. She had faced down a corrupt system not by breaking its rules, but by using them with superior skill. The sheriff could only nod, his face grim. "You'll have it all within the hour." He knew he was beaten. He had a rogue officer who had just threatened a state investigator who was already investigating his department for corruption. There was no spinning this. There was no escape. The climax was the utter and total surrender of his authority to hers. Imani had won, not by being stronger, but by being smarter, more prepared, and on the right side of the law she had sworn to uphold. Part 10. Approximately 600 words. The conclusion was swift and decisive. Miller was fired before the sun set the next day. Faced with incontrovertible audio evidence and the testimony of a state investigator, he was charged with official misconduct, harassment, and attempted evidence tampering for the body cam incident. He took a plea deal to avoid prison time, but his career in law enforcement was over permanently. Sheriff Davies, in a desperate attempt to save his own job, launched a full-scale internal affairs investigation. 3 other deputies with similar complaint histories were forced to resign. The department was put under state oversight for the next 2 years. Imani's actions sent a shockwave through the entire county. The story of the cowgirl, who was actually a top cop, became a local legend. For the migrant workers and other marginalized people who had suffered under Miller's reign of terror, it was a moment of profound, satisfying justice. Imani's arc was complete. She had faced down a personal and professional threat, and in doing so, had cleansed a corrupt system from the inside. Her victory wasn't just personal, it was communal. She hadn't just saved herself, she had protected countless others. The conclusion was emotionally satisfying because the consequences were real, far-reaching and just. She had upheld her father's lesson. The badge was a responsibility, and she had used it to hold power accountable. Epilogue. Approximately 400 words. A few months later, Imani was back on her ranch, enjoying a rare day off. She was on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, when Hank's old pickup truck pulled up. He got out, holding a freshly baked apple pie. "Heard you got a commendation from the governor's office," Hank said, setting the pie down on the porch railing. Imani smiled. "News travels fast. Good news does," he said. "Things are quieter now. Better. The new deputies, they're polite. They treat people with respect." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "That was you. You did that. Imani looked out at the vast, open land that her family had fought for generations to keep. "I just did my job, Hank." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You did more than that. You gave a lot of people their dignity back." She nodded, accepting his words. Her life was a balance between two worlds: the quiet, peaceful life of a rancher, and the demanding, often ugly world of a state investigator. She had proven that she could master both, and that the values of one, honesty, integrity, and a fierce sense of justice, could strengthen the other. The two worlds were not separate. They were two sides of the same honorable coin. CTA, approximately 200 words. Imani's story proves that the most powerful weapon against injustice is often the truth, wielded by someone with the courage to reveal it. She reminded a man who had forgotten it that no one is above the law. If you watched this story all the way to the end, show your support by commenting, "I watched until the end." Your viewership helps us bring more stories of hidden heroes to light, and every comment helps these stories reach others. What do you think was the most satisfying moment? When she first flashed the badge, or when she laid out the case to the sheriff? Let us know your thoughts below. And don't click away. The next story is ready for you. Click the video on your screen to see what happens when a billionaire tries to evict a quiet old librarian from her home, only to discover the library she runs holds a secret that could destroy his entire empire.